They tried to lull me into a stupor at 2 a.m. in my own home. I was wide awake, thank heavens. I hadn't truly slept soundly in weeks, and that particular night, I was sitting up in bed, absorbed in an old collection of pressed botanicals, when I heard the distinct creak of the back gate. That gate was never silent. Arthur used to promise he'd oil it one day, but he never did, and now I was grateful. I extinguished the bedside lamp and sat in the quiet dark. My hearing suddenly sharpened. Someone was moving in the kitchen. Soft footsteps, deliberate, not like a burglar. No, they weren't attempting silence. They believed I was deep in slumber. I reached for my phone and tapped the security app. Bless Clara for insisting on installing that little camera system last Christmas. Just so I can check in on you, Nana, she'd said, her brow furrowed with genuine concern. The screen flickered to life. The hallway camera displayed two shadowy figures. My grandson, Finn, and a woman in crisp blue scrubs, a visiting nurse. My heart didn't accelerate, not yet. I watched as they approached my bedroom door. The woman held a small glass vial and a dropper. I understood then. They intended to sedate me, likely just enough to make me pliable, enough to secure my signature on something. Finn's whisper carried clearly. She's usually out cold by now, just a small dose. Okay? We just need her to sign it tonight. I've got the papers ready. I froze, not from fear, but from a cold, sharp rage. They weren't even bothering to conceal it anymore. I lay back on the bed, eyes closed, my breathing carefully measured, feigning sleep. I felt the door ease open, heard the nurse step inside, caught the faint, sterile scent of antiseptic. She leaned over me, and I let my breath slow to mimic the deep rhythm of sleep. Her cool fingers brushed my wrist. She's very still, she murmured. Just do it, Finn hissed, his voice tight with impatience. I felt the pressure, a drop of liquid on my tongue, then a hand gently closing my mouth. I didn't flinch. The moment she withdrew, I exhaled ever so slightly and allowed my eyes to flutter open as if disturbed from a deep dream. H, Grandma? Finn cursed under his breath. It's all right, Grandma. You were having trouble sleeping. This will help you rest. The nurse's voice was unnervingly smooth. Then they were gone, their whispers fading down the hall. The front door clicked shut once more. I sat up slowly. My mouth felt dry, and a strange dullness settled behind my eyes, like a heavy curtain descending. Whatever they had given me, it wasn't enough. I hadn't truly swallowed it, and the dose must have been minimal. Still, I felt a peculiar lethargy begin to creep through my limbs. I walked to the hallway, my knees trembling faintly. The house was empty, chillingly silent. I went directly to the kitchen drawer and retrieved the old USB stick I kept for Clara's school projects. I slid it into the back of the modem, downloaded the security footage, and transferred the file, labeling it 2 a.m. attempt. I poured myself a glass of water with hands that still shook and sat at the table. The same kitchen where I used to bake Finn his favorite apple tarts every Sunday afternoon. The same Finn who had just tried to incapacitate me, my only grandson. Arthur would have been utterly livid. I sat for hours, staring at the screensaver on my laptop. The video showed everything. Finn unlocking the gate, letting in the nurse, her preparing the vial, their hushed conversation. I replayed the moment he'd said it. We just need her to sign it tonight. Sign what? I moved to the living room, to the mahogany secretary desk I hadn't opened in years. The file folders were precisely where I'd left them, all in Arthur's neat hand. Insurance policies, the will, property deeds, all undisturbed. But there, on the small side table, was a folder I hadn't seen before, a pale lavender. Inside, a copy of my signature, poorly forged, on a financial power of attorney document I'd never agreed to. My knees buckled. I sank hard into the antique armchair. Someone had attempted this before. Perhaps when I'd been recovering from that fall in March. That's when they'd first started helping with my mail. When Marcus, my son, had said, "Don't worry about the bills, Mom. We've got it covered." I didn't utter a single word the next morning. I didn't tell Clara. I didn't call the authorities. I simply made myself tea, watching the sunrise paint the sky. But something profound had fractured within me, and I knew this wasn't an isolated incident. This wasn't a mistake. This was orchestrated. They wanted my signature. They wanted everything. And they believed I wouldn't notice, that I'd simply acquiesce. They were gravely mistaken. I didn't sleep at all that night. The lingering effects of the drug dissipated by dawn, but a persistent nausea remained. I sat at the kitchen table in my robe, both hands clasped around a mug of cold tea. I didn't drink it. I just needed something solid to hold on to. When the sun finally rose, the street outside was quiet. Only Mrs. Henderson's sprinklers began their morning hiss. I watched the water catch the light, my mind a jumble of nothing and everything. It had been a long time since I'd truly felt this kind of solitude. Arthur had been gone for 7 years now, but this was different. Back then, I'd still believed in the enduring strength of family, still believed that grief could forge deeper bonds. It hadn't. Not really. Marcus, my only son, had stepped in quickly. He'd helped with the accounts, the lawyer, the bank. "Just until you get back on your feet, Mom," he'd assured me. I did get back on my feet. He never let go. It started subtly, taking over the bills, assisting with online banking, bringing me papers to sign, always with the same refrain. "It's just easier if I handle it." I didn't argue. My mind was still clouded with grief, my footing still uncertain. He was my son, after all. Later, when I began to ask questions, I received answers that were too polished to trust. "Oh, it's just a routine transfer. I put some funds into a better account for you. No, we don't need to worry about those old life insurance forms. I already sorted them." He'd say it all with a warm smile, a gentle hand on my shoulder, a reassuring pat on the arm. But each time, something was subtly taken from me. A detail, a number, a document. And then there was Finn. He used to visit just to devour my apple tarts and lament about his college courses. He was always a pleasant boy, not the sharpest, but kind, or so I thought. But after Arthur died, Finn started appearing with questions that didn't sound like his own. "Do you still have your original will, Grandma? What happens if you can't, think clearly anymore?" I dismissed it as youthful curiosity. Perhaps he was simply worried. That's what I told myself. Until March. I'd suffered a minor fall, a simple concussion, the doctor said. My speech was unaffected, my memory intact, but I was disoriented for several days. Marcus had rushed in, stayed at the house, taking over everything while I recovered. That's when it must have truly begun, because when I returned home from the hospital, I couldn't locate my birth certificate, my property deed. The lockbox key was missing. Marcus had said, You probably misplaced them, Mom. I'll help you look. But I never saw those papers again. And now, last night, a nurse, a vial, and a whispered scheme to obtain her signature. They weren't waiting any longer. Whatever they'd initiated in March, they intended to complete now. I opened the lavender folder again. That false signature, a printed date, April 12th. I was still in recovery then. The form granted full financial power of attorney to Marcus A. Vance, effective immediately. No cosigner, no medical validation, no witness. But there was one critical flaw, my signature. It wasn't mine. They needed a real one. They'd tried to trick me, then forge me, then drug me, all to get my hand on a page. I sat for a long time, scrutinizing the signature. The loops were wrong. The V curved backward, a habit I'd never had. They'd likely tried to copy it from an old check, but they didn't understand what truly mattered. Not the superficial shape of the letters, but the pressure, the flow, the precise moment of creation. They didn't know me at all. At 10 a.m., the phone rang. Caller ID, Marcus. I didn't answer. I let it ring, watching the screen fade to black. A minute later, a text message arrived. Hi, Mom. Just checking in. Hope you're feeling better this morning. Finn said you were a little confused last night. Want me to bring over some groceries later. Confused? That word landed like a physical blow. They were meticulously setting the stage. Next would come the hushed whispers to neighbors. Then an unrequested doctor's visit. Then perhaps a nice assisted living facility they'd researched on my behalf. I placed the phone face down. Enough. By noon, I was dressed and standing at the front window, observing the wind rustle through the oak trees. I didn't have a grand strategy yet, but I possessed two invaluable things, time and my mind, both still undeniably mine. I took the USB stick and slipped it into the pocket of my coat. Then I picked up the phone and dialed someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Albright and Associates, the secretary answered. How may I direct your call? Tell him Alara Vance is calling, I said calmly. His former history teacher. He'll remember. A brief pause, then a warm, familiar voice. Mrs. Vance, it's been, 15 years? Are you quite all right? I require a private legal consultation, I stated, immediately. And Mr. Albright, ensure no records are released to anyone, not even my son. Especially not my son. He was silent for a moment. Then, come in at 2 p.m., my office. I'll clear my schedule. I hung up, exhaled, and surveyed my quiet house. I'd raised a child in these rooms, baked countless birthday cakes, held Arthur's hand during thunderstorms. Now, the battle for my life and my dignity would commence here, and I wasn't going to surrender easily. By 1:30, I was in the car. It took me a moment to recall how the seatbelt clipped. I hadn't driven since last Thanksgiving. Marcus had insisted it was too risky for me, always sending Finn to chauffeur me around. But I'd kept the old sedan in good repair, had the oil changed every 6 months, purely out of stubbornness. I turned the key. It started on the first try. Mr. Albright's office was across town in one of those modern glass and steel buildings with names like Prosperity Tower Professional Suites. It looked like the kind of place where young men wore tailored suits and spoke in carefully modulated tones. Wesley Albright had been a respectable student in my class, a bit too proud, but undeniably clever. His wife, Clara's mother, had once cried in my classroom because her best friend spread a rumor about her at the spring dance. I still remembered comforting her in the hallway. He emerged to greet me himself. "Mrs. Vance," he said, extending a hand, "you look remarkably well." "I was drugged last night," I replied, my tone flat. "I'm not in the mood for pleasantries." He blinked, then nodded. "Understood. Let's go inside." His office smelled of leather and fresh coffee. There were framed degrees on the wall, a photograph of his children in Halloween costumes, a polished wooden desk, almost too grand for the room. He closed the door behind us, then gestured to the chair opposite his. "You mentioned a legal matter involving your son." "I said I was drugged," I corrected. "In my own home at 2 a.m. I have video proof. Do you wish to see it?" He paused. "Yes." I retrieved the USB from my purse and handed it to him. While he inserted it into his laptop, I gazed at the bookshelf behind him. Mostly law texts, a few historical biographies. One of the spines was crooked. The video played. He watched, without interruption. Finn's voice, the nurse's hands, my feigned unconsciousness under the quilt, the whispered words, "Just a small dose. Get her to sign." Wesley Albright leaned back in his chair. "That," he stated, "is extremely serious." I folded my hands in my lap. They want control of my finances, my house, my life. My son has been moving toward this for months, perhaps years. I allowed it because I refused to believe he could be capable of such a thing. But now I have no illusions. He regarded me carefully. "Do you believe you are in immediate physical danger?" I shook my head. "Not physical danger, but I recognize the type of danger that wears a friendly face. I've witnessed it in the classroom. I've seen it in hospital waiting rooms. It's the kind that smiles while it systematically erases you." He nodded slowly. "All right. First, we revoke any power of attorney you may have signed, whether valid or otherwise. Then, we secure your financial accounts. Then, we make multiple copies of that video. One will go into a legal lockbox under my name, one with a trusted third party, and one in my personal vault." I leaned forward. "They've already forged one signature. They are attempting to create a paper trail that paints me as incompetent. If I were to disappear tomorrow, they would claim I was delusional, that I forgot things, that I was confused, and everyone would believe them. Then we ensure there is an irrefutable record," he said. "Starting today." He typed as we spoke, quick, precise movements. "Do you have access to your accounts?" "I used to. My online login no longer works. Marcus said the bank must have updated their system." "I'll file an inquiry. We'll flag any irregular transactions, and I'll request an injunction against all financial activity from your son, effective immediately." I looked down at my hands. They were spotted and dry, skin thinning with age, but they were steady. "Wesley," I said quietly, "if anything happens to me, if I fall or collapse, or if someone finds me unresponsive, don't trust it." His fingers paused on the keyboard. "You believe they might try again?" "I believe I stopped being a mother to them a long time ago," I said. "Now, I am merely an obstacle." A silence settled between us. He clicked something, then turned the screen toward me. "This is your revocation of power of attorney. I'll file it today. Marcus Vance will be formally notified. He will lose all access unless you provide explicit written consent with 2 witnesses." "Good," I said. He opened another folder. "And I'll prepare a document declaring you fully competent to manage your affairs, signed by me, dated, and sealed. I signed everything. My hand didn't tremble once. Afterward, he leaned back and exhaled. May I ask something personal? Yes. Why now? Why not months ago? You're sharp. You must have seen it coming. I smiled faintly. Because hope dies slowly, Wesley. You raise someone, hold their tiny hand when they're small. You give them everything. You don't wake up one day ready to believe they'd steal from you. Not until they try to put a sedative in your drink. He didn't respond to that. As I stood to leave, I looked out his office window. A family walked across the parking lot. A woman in a business suit. A man holding a child's hand. They were laughing. I'm not angry, I said. I'm not even hurt. Not in the way you might imagine. I'm just profoundly tired of being taken for granted. He nodded. I'll keep this file under lock and key. If anyone asks, we've never spoken. Thank you. By the time I stepped back into the sunlight, I felt taller, not younger, not necessarily safer, but whole. I still had work to do. I wasn't finished yet. I stopped by the bank on my way home, the same branch I'd used since 1972. Back then, it was called Community Savings, and the manager knew every client's name by heart. These days, it had a sleeker name, Nexus Financial, and a lot more polished marble floors. But I recognized one face behind the glass. Mrs. Vance? The teller squinted, then smiled. Oh my goodness, I haven't seen you in ages. It's Brenda. I used to help you with your safety deposit box. I nodded. Yes, I'm here to speak with a manager today. Of course. She lowered her voice, sensing the urgency. Give me a moment. I didn't sit. I stood near the window, watching cars move through the lot. The people passing by were younger than me, faster, but none of them had lived as much life as I had. I reminded myself of that. The door opened. A young man in a dark blue suit stepped out. Mrs. Vance, I'm Daniel Chen, Account Services Manager. Come with me, please. His office was small, efficient, impersonal. He offered me water. I declined. I need a full printout of every transaction made from my accounts in the last 6 months, I stated, placing my ID on the desk. I also need to know who has access, and I want that access revoked today. He blinked. Of course. Let me just verify your credentials. I passed him a secondary form of ID. He tapped on his keyboard, then frowned. It shows here that online access was transferred to a joint profile under a Marcus Vance. Is that my son? I interrupted. That transfer was made without my consent. Please mark it as disputed. He hesitated. Mrs. Vance, we usually require written proof. I just came from my attorney's office. He's submitting documentation as we speak. You'll receive formal notice today. In the meantime, I expect these accounts to be frozen. I am protecting myself from financial abuse. That word hit hard. Abuse. But it was the unvarnished truth. He nodded slowly. I understand. Let me retrieve your statements. He printed out stack after stack of paper. I sat there, flipping through them, as the weight of each transaction settled like dust in my lungs. $8,000 wire to something called Evergreen Holdings, a $300 gaming console purchase. Finn didn't even live here. $600 recurring payments to a luxury golf club. $700 labeled home maintenance. I hadn't seen a single repair, and then the worst of it, transfers between my savings account and an account ending in 1198. That was mine. But these were withdrawals I never approved, all labeled routine transfers. Routine for whom? Do you recognize any of these, Mrs. Vance? I recognize theft, I said quietly. That's enough for today. Freeze it all. Yes, ma'am. He handed me the confirmation slip. I folded it neatly and tucked it into my purse. On my way out, Brenda caught my eye again. Her smile faded when she saw my expression. Something told me word would get around. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, sorting papers into 3 piles: legal, financial, and personal. I wrote dates on each folder, added notes, clipped receipts. Years ago, Arthur used to tease me about my labeling habit, said it made the kitchen feel like a post office, but now it was the only thing keeping me from drowning in chaos. At 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. I stood still, spine straight. No one had called to say they were coming. I hadn't told anyone I'd be home. I opened the door. It was Marcus. He wore that particular expression, the one he used when trying to appear calm, but was simmering underneath. The same expression he'd worn in the high school when the principal had called him in for cheating on his physics final. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice too bright. "Can we talk?" I didn't step aside. "You can talk from there." He glanced at the porch, visibly uncomfortable. I just, Finn mentioned you were upset about something. There seems to be a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" He sighed. "Look, I know you're still recovering from your fall, and sometimes memory—" "Don't," I cut in. "Don't you dare." His mouth snapped shut. I watched him shift his weight. Guilty feet. "I know everything, Marcus, about the documents, the forged signature, the money, and I know about the nurse last night." He went pale. "What nurse? You were confused. I have it on camera." He froze. For the first time in a long time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not worry, not exasperation. Fear. I stepped forward just enough to make him instinctively back away from the door. "Your access to my accounts has been revoked. Legal action is pending. I've hired a lawyer. Everything you've done has been documented." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "You wanted my signature?" I said coldly. "You'll get one on a restraining order if necessary. Mom, I am no longer your mom when it comes to finances or trust or forgiveness." He looked as if he'd been slapped. "I raised you," I said, my voice low. "I gave you everything. You took my grief, my silence, and you turned it into an opportunity." "I didn't mean." "But you did." I stepped back inside and closed the door slowly. He didn't knock again. I didn't cry. Instead, I turned on the porch light, sat back down at my table, and continued sorting the papers, 1 page at a time. Order was returning, piece by quiet piece. The next morning, I woke before the sun. My hands ached from sorting papers the night before, and the air had that early fall sharpness that seeps into the joints. I sat up slowly, letting the stiffness pass. Then I looked out the window. No sign of Marcus's car. I hadn't expected him to show again so soon, not after the way I'd spoken to him, but I didn't trust him to stay away. The video file was still tucked safely into my sewing box, alongside Arthur's old military medals and Clara's Mother's Day cards. I didn't keep anything important in obvious places anymore, not since the hospital stay, not since things started going missing. A bond certificate here, a notepad there. I made myself tea and watched the steam rise from the cup. Then I reached for the old landline phone on the counter. Not the cell, the landline, the number no one but Clara still used. I dialed her. "Hi, Nana." Her voice was sleepy but cheerful. I'm not calling to chat, sweetheart, I said gently. I need to ask a favor, a big one. Anything. I need you to meet me at the library this afternoon. No questions right now. Bring your laptop, and if anyone asks, you're just helping me check email. There was a pause, but Clara wasn't the kind to pry. Okay, 3 saws, sharp. I hung up and stood for a moment, watching the phone in my hand. I hated dragging her into this, but she was the only one I truly trusted. The only one who never asked me to sign anything, never treated me like I was fragile or confused. She just loved me purely, quietly. At 3 sharp, we met at the library. I chose the corner computer desk, the one near the stacks of old town records. Fewer people passed through there, and it afforded us some privacy. Clara arrived in a windbreaker, carrying a battered messenger bag and a look of quiet concern. You okay? She asked softly. I will be. I handed her the USB drive. Can you upload this video somewhere safe, somewhere password protected, off-site, and then send a copy to this email address? I handed her a note with Wesley Albright's encrypted legal inbox. She didn't ask what was on the video, just nodded and got to work. That's the thing about women like us. We don't need all the details to know when something truly matters. As she typed, I pulled out a small notebook and wrote the names of the companies listed on my account statements, the ones Marcus had been siphoning money to. I want to know what these are, I said, if they're real, if they're registered under Finn's name, if they even exist. You want me to research them? Quietly, discreetly. Don't use your personal email. Don't let your parents know. She didn't flinch. Nana, she said, closing the laptop. Whatever this is, I'm in, and I think I've known something wasn't right for a long time. I looked at her then, properly looked. She had her mother's chin, but my eyes, sharp and steady. Maybe I hadn't lost everything after all. We spent another hour digging through websites. Most of the companies were shell names, addresses that didn't exist, businesses with no phone number. A few were linked to Finn's old college roommate. One was registered out of state. They were attempting to launder the money slowly, quietly, bit by bit. We saved every screenshot. By the time I left the library, the sky had clouded over. The wind had picked up. I felt stronger, but the kind of strong that comes after bracing against a storm. That evening, around 7 p.m., Finn knocked on the door. I didn't answer at first, just watched him through the peephole. He held a small bouquet in his hand. Grocery store flowers, the kind with too much cellophane and not enough heart. I opened the door a crack. Hi, Grandma, he said, his smile too wide. Can we talk? About what? He looked surprised. About everything. I know things have gotten a little weird, and I wanted to clear the air. I didn't move. I brought flowers, he added, lifting the bouquet as if it proved sincerity. I'm allergic, I lied, then stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind me. He looked startled. Don't take this the wrong way, I said, my voice even. But I've spoken to my lawyer. I've seen the documents. I know what you tried to do. His face changed then, just for a flicker. Not shame, annoyance, like a child caught sneaking candy. Grandma, come on, he said with a practiced chuckle. You've been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe things got misinterpreted. Do you know what a felony is, Finn? I asked quietly. Do you know how many years it carries for financial fraud and medical impersonation? He blinked. Wait, what? I have the footage of you and the nurse. I have witnesses, backups, a legal file. This isn't going to disappear." He looked around, suddenly nervous. "Can we not do this outside?" "We're not doing anything. I'm making a choice. From now on, you're not welcome on my property. If you come back uninvited, I'll file a police report. If you contact me again, I'll forward everything to the authorities." His jaw tightened. "You don't mean that," he said. "You love me." I looked him dead in the eye. "I did, but love doesn't survive betrayal, Finn. It just turns quiet." Then I stepped back inside and locked the door. Sunday dinner had always been a Vance tradition. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, too much wine, too many opinions. Arthur used to say it was the only time the family remembered how to speak without shouting. So when Marcus called from a new number, as if I wouldn't recognize his voice, and said, "We'd love to have you for dinner tonight, Mom," I didn't answer right away. He waited, then added, "Just the family, nothing formal. Finn wants to apologize. We all do." I let a silence stretch just long enough to sting. "I'll be there at 6, I said. "Don't wait for me." I wore a soft gray sweater and my old silver brooch, the one Arthur bought in Santa Fe for our 30th anniversary. A quiet reminder of who I was before I became just Mom or the problem. I didn't wear anything too nice. They'd expect that. I wanted to look just tired enough to be underestimated. Their house hadn't changed. Vinyl siding, perfectly manicured lawn, overfed hydrangeas. Marcus opened the door like a man who'd rehearsed humility in the mirror. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Marcus." Inside, the air smelled of garlic and guilt. Finn was in the kitchen, setting the table with exaggerated care. Bethany, Marcus's wife, was arranging sliced bread in a basket as if she were auditioning for sincerity. "Mrs. Vance," she said. She always called me that when she was trying to be polite. The rest of the time she said, "Your mother," like it tasted bad. "Bethany," I nodded. Dinner was roasted pork, not chicken. They never got the details right anymore. Conversation tiptoed around real topics. Finn asked if I was feeling better. Marcus said he was glad we could all move past the misunderstanding. I let them talk, let them feel in control. I ate slowly. I watched and I listened. To Bethany's mention of a possible investment opportunity. To Finn saying he was thinking of moving out, maybe getting his own place. To Marcus's casual remark, "Oh, Mom, that thing we talked about, the deed paperwork, we'll need your signature again soon. Just some corrections." There it was. I took a bite of green beans, chewed, swallowed. "Of course," I said mildly. "Just send it to my lawyer." The room shifted. Marcus smiled tightly. "You don't have to bring Wesley into everything." "I do now," I said. "You made sure of that." Silence. Bethany picked up her wine glass. "We're just trying to get back to normal, Mrs. Vance." "There's no normal left," I said evenly. "Only truth and consequences." They didn't know what to do with that, so they smiled and cleared the plates. I left before dessert. In the car, I sat in silence for a long time. I hadn't raised my voice once. I hadn't made a scene, but I'd seen what I needed to see. They were still trying, still hoping I'd slip, that I'd soften, forget, agree to something, just for convenience. They didn't realize I'd already buried the version of me who'd fall for that. They were eating dinner with someone new now, someone watching, counting, and ready. Clara came over Monday evening with a tote bag full of leftover lentil soup and 2 small pastries from the cafe near her office. "I thought maybe you hadn't been eating right," she said, setting everything down on the counter like she'd done it 100 times before. "I eat just fine," I said, "but I won't say no to soup." She smiled but didn't push. That's what I've always liked about her. She's not one of those girls who fills silence with noise. She lets things breathe. We sat at the table, the soup warming on the stove. Outside, the wind had started to pick up. Dry leaves clicked across the driveway like little feet trying to run away from something. She looked at me for a long moment, then finally said, "Is it all really as bad as I think it is?" I didn't answer right away. I reached for the sugar tin and took out the flash drive. I laid it on the table between us. "This is the only copy I didn't lock away," I said quietly. "And I kept it for one reason, so I could decide whether you were ready to see it." She didn't touch it. She just looked at me. "I'm not afraid of whatever's on it." "I know you're not, but I'm not talking about fear. I'm talking about how once you see something clearly, you can't unsee it. It changes things." She nodded. "Things have already changed." I studied her face, the faint freckles, the strong chin, the worry she tried not to show. "Do you remember," I said softly, "when you were 9 and you asked me why your dad never came to my birthday parties?" She smiled faintly. "You said he had a busy job and was tired." That was only partly true. The truth is, he didn't want to come. He thought it was boring, that there were more important people to be around, more important faces to impress. "I always thought it was Mom," she said. "She said she never liked you much." "Oh, she didn't. But your father, he's not a victim of her. He's her match. Same priorities. Same blind spot for kindness." Clara was quiet. The soup started to bubble gently behind us. "Sweetheart," I said, "I need you to understand something. What's happening now? This isn't just about money. It's not just about papers or bank accounts or who signs what. It's about whether I exist as a person to them or just as a gate they need to get through." She nodded slowly. "And you don't think they'll stop?" "I know they won't." There was a long silence. Then Clara reached out and gently placed her hand over mine. "I want to help you, not just with tech stuff or errands. I want to do what they never did. Stand beside you, not over you." I looked down at her fingers. Strong, unpainted nails, no rings. A woman who didn't need to play roles to feel valuable. "I believe you," I said simply. We had soup then. Thick, comforting, homemade. She'd always been good at making do with what she had. Another thing we shared. Before she left, she handed me a folder. "I did what you asked. Those businesses, the ones from the statements, most are empty shells. One's registered in Nevada under Finn's college roommate's name. Another is tied to a P.O. box. Everything. Screenshots, registrations, address histories. Clean, organized." "You did all this in a day?" I asked. She shrugged. "You taught me to be efficient." I held the folder in my hands. It felt heavier than it was. "You keep a copy?" I asked. "Of course." She hesitated at the door. "Nana, are you going to take them to court?" I didn't answer directly. "I'm going to take back what they tried to steal," I said, "and then I'm going to make sure they never try again." She nodded. No shock, no hesitation, and that's when I knew I wasn't alone in this anymore. Not really. After she left, I placed her folder next to the one Wesley Albright had started. 2 neat stacks, 2 lines of defense. Let them come. This time, I had something they didn't count on, a witness and a granddaughter who didn't flinch. Wesley Albright had already pulled the files when I arrived. 2 binders lay open on his desk, one marked Initial POA Attempt, and the other Banking Activity Disputed. He didn't offer coffee this time, just gestured for me to sit. I took the liberty of requesting certified copies of every document your son submitted under your name, he said, flipping a page toward me. This is the original power of attorney you signed in March. During your recovery, I scanned the signature. It was mine, yes, but the text was different from what I remembered. There was a clause buried halfway down the second page. May act independently without further consultation, including financial instruments, property transactions, and fiduciary reallocation. I didn't read that, I said. Marcus told me it was just to help pay hospital bills. He didn't lie, Wesley said. He just didn't say everything. He turned the page. And this, he added, tapping a copy underneath, was filed 2 weeks later. Look closely. Another power of attorney, different date. But the signature was mine, except it wasn't. The V sloped wrong. The A leaned too far left. And most telling of all, the ink bled differently. A scanned signature, not a real one. He looked at me carefully. I can order forensic analysis, but it's already obvious. This is a forgery. I nodded. No surprise anymore, just confirmation. And the bank records? He pushed the second binder toward me. We flagged over $120,000 in questionable transfers. A portion went through a dummy company tied to Finn's friend. The rest filtered through what appears to be a consulting firm owned by your son. On paper, it looks like you're paying him for services. What services? I asked, though I already knew. None. Not a single invoice, no agreement, just lines on a spreadsheet with vague labels. I sat back, my hands resting on the table's edge. And that's enough to press charges. Wesley Albright nodded slowly. More than enough, but here's where it gets delicate. If we go to court now, it's a full-scale family scandal. Media might pick it up. It's public record. You'll have to testify. I'm not afraid of court, I said. I know, but we can also send a cease and desist, threaten formal charges, unless they voluntarily return the funds and void all access. That might be cleaner, faster, and if they don't cooperate, then we proceed. I thought for a moment. Let's start with the letter. Give them a deadline, 10 business days. 3, he looked up. You're sure? I've been patient for 8 months. They get 3 days. Wesley Albright smiled faintly and made a note. I'll write it today, clear, specific, and firm. Make sure it mentions the footage, I added. Let them know we're not bluffing. Already included, he typed for several minutes, while I reviewed the list of forged transactions again. Each one hurt in its own way, not for the amount, but for what it meant. Trust eroded line by line. Love exploited in plain numbers. Before I left, I handed him Clara's folder. Supplemental research, I said. He flipped through it, eyebrows lifting. Impressive. She's thorough. She's her grandmother's girl. He laughed softly, then grew serious again. Alara, this isn't just a legal case. This is a personal war. If you keep going, you don't get to go back to pretending everything's fine. I don't want to pretend, I said. I want to be free. He stood, extended his hand. Then let's get you free. As I left the office, the wind caught the edge of my scarf. I let it blow for a moment, feeling the air on my face. I wasn't tired. I wasn't afraid. I was just getting started. On Wednesday morning, I called Marcus. The tone was different this time, lighter, almost casual. I knew how to soften my voice just enough. I'd been an archivist for 34 years. I knew how to make people believe what I needed them to. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. "I've been thinking. Maybe I was too harsh the other night." A pause then. "Mom, I'd like to talk. Just us. You, Finn, me. No lawyers." Another pause. He was weighing it. "Of course," he said. "That sounds good. Maybe we can clear the air." "I think that would be nice. Come by tomorrow around 6. I'll make coffee." He agreed. Too fast. They thought I was coming back to the fold, that I'd blinked, that the threat had passed. And so they said yes to coffee, to peace, to one more chance to wrap their hands around what was left of me. But I wasn't offering peace. I was offering a mirror. The next day, I prepared like I used to for important research meetings. Clean table, 2 chairs across from mine, a notepad, the coffee brewed, not too strong, the front door unlocked. At exactly 5:56, they pulled into the driveway. Finn looked nervous. Marcus looked polished. He always dressed the part when he thought negotiation was coming. "Hi, Mom," he said, stepping inside like he owned the air. "Thanks for inviting us." Finn mumbled hello. He didn't meet my eyes. We sat. I poured coffee. Then I placed the envelope in the center of the table. Plain manila, sealed. John looked at it. "What's that?" "Everything," I said. "Every document, every screenshot, every bank record, and a printed transcript of what the security camera caught on Saturday night." His smile twitched. "Mom, this—" "I'm not asking questions," I said evenly. "I'm giving answers. You have 3 days to return every cent, 3 days to sign the withdrawal of any claims, rights, or permissions tied to my property or finances." Finn shifted in his seat. "We never—" "You did," I said. "You know it, I know it, and now my lawyer knows it." Marcus's mask slipped for a second, just a flicker. Something sour curling at the edge of his mouth. "This isn't necessary," he said quietly. "We're family." "Exactly, and that's the only reason I haven't taken this straight to court." Finn looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. I continued, voice steady. "I have 3 signed affidavits. One from my attorney, one from a bank officer, one from a neighbor who saw the nurse enter and leave. I've documented everything. The next step is entirely up to you." Marcus sat back, staring at me like he didn't recognize the woman in front of him. "I don't know what happened to you," he said, "but this is ugly." "No," I said, "this is honest. You just don't like how it looks in daylight." They left 10 minutes later. No yelling, no tears, no apologies, just silence and a closing door. As I stood in the hallway after they'd gone, I felt no triumph, only quiet. I hadn't won anything yet, but I'd made my line clear, and for the first time, I saw fear in their retreat. Not fear of punishment, fear of exposure, and that, I knew, was only just beginning. They came back the next night, this time without coffee, without masks, no pretense. It was 8:17 when the knock came, firm, not frantic. I was already dressed, slacks, cardigan, slippers, nothing dramatic. I didn't need drama. I needed truth. I opened the door and let them in. Marcus didn't bother with small talk. "We need to discuss what you're doing." "What I'm doing?" I repeated, closing the door behind them. "Yes. You're threatening your own family over misunderstandings, over paperwork, and you've got Clara involved now, which frankly is out of line. I walked past him into the living room and sat. They followed. Finn stayed near the doorway, arms crossed, chewing at his thumbnail. You have until Friday, I said, to comply. Marcus's voice dropped into that low, measured tone he used when cornered. You're not thinking clearly. You've let lawyers and paranoia poison everything. But if you keep pushing this, it will get ugly. There it is, I said. The first threat. It's not a threat, Mom. It's reality. You want to drag your family through court? Let reporters dig through every file. Let the community know you're suing your own son. Do you really think I care what the community thinks? He flinched. I let the silence linger. You stole from me, I said flatly. You forged my signature. You hired a nurse to sedate me in the middle of the night. And now you want me to pretend it never happened? Marcus's voice cracked. We were trying to help you. You were vulnerable. You weren't thinking clearly. I was thinking clearly enough to install cameras, I said. He stared at me, jaw clenched. I've reviewed every minute of that footage, I continued. Every whispered word, every lie. The law doesn't care how gently you steal. It's still theft. Finn finally spoke. I didn't know she was going to use a needle. I thought it was just like melatonin or something. You thought, I said, turning toward him, that I wouldn't wake up, that I'd sign whatever you put in front of me, that I was too old to matter. He didn't answer. Marcus exhaled hard iswar imir chei. Dawar orikiu. Ganiki oridal teen. Gichu ayuchu. Ayu babu aichi. Ayu kinkis ainchi. And you lose everything. I smiled, not out of cruelty, but clarity. I already lost you. The minute you saw my life as a ledger. He stood. I'll fight this. You already did, I said, and you lost. You just don't know it yet. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. You raised me to be strong. No, I said quietly. I raised you to be decent. You chose the rest. The door closed behind them harder than it needed to. I didn't get up right away. I let the silence settle over the room like dust on old books. Then I walked to the filing cabinet, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the envelope I'd kept untouched until now, the one labeled public copy. Inside, a flash drive, a signed letter from Wesley Albright confirming the validity of the footage, a printed timeline of transactions and forged documents, a letter addressed to be released in the event of harm or incapacitation. I placed it by the front door. I wasn't just preparing anymore. I was declaring. The envelope came on Thursday morning. No return address, no stamp, just slid under my door like a note in a high school locker. Pale cream paper folded neatly, the handwriting too careful to be casual. I opened it with the letter opener Arthur gave me on our 5th anniversary. The blade was still sharp. Inside were 2 short lines. Be careful who you trust. Accidents happen. I read it once, then again, then I put it in a plastic sleeve, marked the date and time, and placed it into the evidence binder, now half full and growing heavier each week. I didn't feel afraid. I felt insulted. They were running out of moves, and sloppy fear always comes before real mistakes. At 10:12 a.m., Wesley Albright called. I received 2 calls this morning, one from a journalist with the county paper asking if I represent you, and one from an insurance investigator requesting a copy of your durable medical directive. My what exactly? They're casting lines, he said, seeing if you've been declared incompetent, if they can spin this another way. Let them try. They will, he said. Brr, brr. They won't get far. I've preemptively filed a protective statement with the court reaffirming your capacity. You've passed every cognitive exam. You're sharp enough to put most people to shame. I smiled into the phone. Keep that on file. I already did. And Alara, there's something else. They'll start trying to turn this around in public. Whisper campaigns. Poor old woman confused by greedy lawyers. They want to make it muddy. I know. I just want to be sure you're ready. I'm beyond ready, I said. I'm bored. He laughed. I'll draft the official complaint by Monday if they don't comply. They won't, I said, not without pressure. That afternoon, I called Evelyn Reed. Evelyn was a retired reporter who now ran a small newsletter for the local historical society. A smart woman with a nose for rot and no patience for polite silence. She once published a 3-part series on the mayor's cousin's embezzlement from the Veterans Fund. She never lost a lawsuit. Alara, she said when she picked up, I haven't heard that voice in years. I've got a story for you, I said, and receipts. Tell me everything. We met at her house an hour later. I brought a copy of the footage and a carefully marked file. She listened without interrupting, then looked me in the eye. Do you want this public? I want the truth in the open. Quiet justice doesn't work with men like Marcus. She nodded. Then I'll run it in the Sunday edition, full page. No soft corners. She picked up her recorder. You ready to go on the record? I sat straighter in the chair. I was drugged at 2 a.m. in my own home by my grandson and a hired nurse so that I'd sign away everything I built, but I didn't. I was awake. I was recording. And now I'm speaking. Evelyn hit record, and I began. The article came out Sunday morning, front page of the Community Bulletin, then syndicated by a larger blog Evelyn freelanced for. She sent me the draft the night before. I didn't change a word. The headline read, Elder Fraud, Family Lies, a Grandmother Fights Back. There was no photo of me, just my words, my voice, my truth. By noon, my landline rang 5 times. 3 were neighbors, polite, confused, wanting to check in. 1 was from the church. The voice was tight, polite. We're praying for you, Alara. And the 5th call was Marcus. I didn't answer. At 1:34 p.m., I received a text from an unknown number. Why would you do this to us? I deleted it. They thought shame was still a weapon, that I'd feel embarrassed, exposed. But I wasn't the one hiding behind fake names and stolen dollars. By evening, Clara came by with a grocery bag and a tight smile. They're scrambling, she said, setting down a box of tea and a pack of shortbread cookies. Finn deleted his social media. Dad tried to call me twice, then emailed some legal nonsense. Let him, I said. It's all noise. She pulled out her laptop. Evelyn's piece is trending on the regional forum. A few lawyers are commenting, talking about power of attorney loopholes. Some survivors are sharing stories. One woman said her nephew forged her checks for 2 years before anyone believed her. I sat with that for a moment, then, good. Let them speak. The next morning, Wesley Albright called with a voice that held both amusement and steel. They called my office. he said. Tried to threaten me with a defamation suit. What did you say? I said, my client has documentation, timestamps, surveillance, and a sworn affidavit from a nurse who's willing to testify if subpoenaed. I sat straighter. The nurse? She was fired. Finn didn't pay her what he promised. She's flipping. Does she admit to the injection? She admits to being asked. Claims she swapped the sedative for saline because she felt uncomfortable. I believed her, not because she was noble, but because greed makes people sloppy, and someone like Finn wouldn't have paid well or on time. Wesley continued, I suggest we file formal charges this week. Fraud, coercion, unlawful impersonation, abuse of legal authority. And we will. That night, I sat in my garden for the first time in weeks. The roses had gone dry at the tips, but the roots were fine. A little pruning, a little water, they'd come back. Like me. I didn't feel triumphant, just steady, grounded, like I'd finally stopped bleeding from invisible wounds. This wasn't justice yet, but it was the beginning of it, and for the first time in months, I slept without checking the locks twice. The summons was served on a Thursday. Marcus received his at 9:47 a.m., hand-delivered at his office. Finn got his later that evening at the apartment he shared with a girl who hadn't yet learned who he really was. They both signed. No protest, no calls. They knew. The charges were clear. Fraud, forgery, attempted financial coercion, medical endangerment. Wesley Albright had included everything. Every form, every timestamp, every recorded word from that night. It was all there now, not just evidence. Truth in ink. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table. The document spread before me like a map. It wasn't just about what they'd done. It was how long I'd let them. I stared at the folder labeled 2017-2024 and felt a strange kind of grief. Not for the money, not even for the betrayal, but for the years I'd let go by believing silence was safer than confrontation. It never was. I thought about how many times I downplayed the small things, missing mail, vague answers, that feeling in my gut when Marcus deflected questions with too much warmth. How many women my age are told to let it go, to not make a fuss? How many of us vanish quietly in our own homes? That night, I opened a fresh notebook, soft cover, thick paper, no lines, and I began writing. Not what they did, but what I remembered before all this, before Arthur died, before the fall, before the mail started disappearing. I wrote about my archive, the smell of old paper, the quiet rustle of turning pages, the sense of order. I wrote about Arthur's laugh when he burned the toast, the way he always carried the groceries in one trip, no matter how heavy. I wrote about Clara, age 5, holding a robin's egg she'd found in the grass, whispering, I won't break it. These things, they were mine. No one had tried to take those. The next morning, Evelyn Reed called again. Her voice was sharp and electric. We've had 20 emails, she said. Women your age, older, some younger, same story, different names. They're asking if you'll speak again, not about the crime, about the survival. I didn't answer right away. Alara, she asked, would you? I'm not a speaker. You're already speaking. I looked at the notebook in my lap. The page was half full, the writing slanted. My hand wasn't as steady as it used to be, but the words came clean. I'll write something, I said. Good. Send it to me when you're ready. Later that afternoon, I walked to the mailbox, something I hadn't done in weeks without hesitation. The air smelled like dry leaves and cut grass. The breeze wasn't kind or cruel, just present. Inside the box, a grocery flyer, a coupon for roofing, and a single white envelope with no return address. I opened it. Inside was a check from Marcus, the amount, the exact sum that had been taken. No note, just a payment. A weak apology in the shape of numbers. I held it in my hand, then brought it inside and set it on the table without looking at it again. I didn't need their money. I needed them to know they didn't own me anymore. And now they did. It had been 19 days since I filed the complaint. The silence from Marcus and Finn was loud, but not surprising. Their lawyer had responded through formal channels, short, defensive, packed with legal hedging. Wesley Albright called it the noise before surrender. I just called it familiar. I'd stopped waiting for apologies. They weren't coming, and I no longer needed them. That Tuesday, I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I took the bus, Route 6, the long loop through town. I used to ride it every week, back when Arthur was still alive. He loved to read the paper on the way, nodding to strangers like they were old friends. The driver was different now, younger, polite. He didn't ask where I was headed. I got off at the last stop, before the old library. The building hadn't changed. Same low windows, same flagpole that leaned just slightly. I didn't go inside. I just stood across the street, looking at the place I'd given 34 years to. I could almost hear the quiet hum of the microfiche readers. It wasn't nostalgia I felt. It was recognition that I had existed long before Marcus or Finn ever needed me for anything, that I had been someone with authority, with rhythm, with purpose, and I still was. Afterward, I walked 2 blocks to a small coffee shop I used to visit. It had new owners, new wallpaper, but the scones were the same. I ordered one, sat by the window, and opened my notebook. There was no anger in the pages now, no strategy, just pieces of me returned. I wrote, "There is a loneliness that comes not from being forgotten, but from being misunderstood by people who once loved you. It is a colder kind of silence, but it is also survivable." I closed the book and watched the street. Young mothers pushing strollers, teenagers kicking pebbles, a man in a suit on his phone. I wasn't part of their world anymore. Not the way I used to be, but I didn't feel invisible. I felt untethered and oddly free. When I got home, I found a letter in the mailbox. This one had a return address from the district attorney's office. It confirmed what Wesley Albright had already hinted. A formal investigation into financial abuse of vulnerable adults had been opened, with my case cited as the catalyst, not just for prosecution, but for reform, policy reviews, banking oversight. My name wouldn't be in the headlines, but it would be in the records. I placed the letter in my keep drawer, right beside the deed to my house. The real one, the one I'd kept in a different place, far from their hands. At dusk, Clara came by. No questions. She just sat with me on the porch, legs tucked under her, sipping iced tea. "I read your piece in Evelyn's follow-up," she said, after a while. "It made me cry, but not for the reason you think." "Why then?" "Because I realized I've been afraid of becoming invisible too, and now I know what to do if someone tries." I reached for her hand. She didn't flinch. The sun dipped low, turning the trees to gold. And for the first time in years, I didn't brace myself for what would come next. Because whatever it was, I'd meet it as myself, whole, seen, and free. I didn't go to court, not because I changed my mind, but because they did. On the 19th day, Wesley Albright called. "They've signed," he said, "full restitution, formal surrender of financial control, a statement of wrongdoing, sealed but admissible. You'll never hear from them again unless you want to." I sat at the table with a piece of toast in my hand, uneaten. The radio played something soft and instrumental behind me. "What happens now?" I asked. He paused. "Now you live." And so I did. It didn't happen all at once. Healing rarely does. The mail still made me pause some days. A knock at the door still made my breath hitch, but the fear wasn't sharp anymore. It was dull, fading. I took walks again. I called old friends. I answered the phone without scanning the number first. One evening, I opened the letter Marcus had sent with the restitution check. I hadn't read it before. Just 3 lines. "I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for what I became. I don't expect you to forgive me." I folded it neatly and placed it with the others, not out of sentiment, but as a record. The truth deserves a spine. Finn never wrote. That didn't surprise me. His silence was the truest thing he ever gave me. Clara came often. We didn't talk about the case much anymore. It had become background. Instead, we talked about her work, her writing, her future. Sometimes she asked about mine. "You ever think about leaving the house?" she asked one afternoon. "Traveling?" I looked out the window. "Not yet. This house still has my breath in the walls." She understood. One night, I sat down at my desk with the notebook I'd filled across those long weeks, the one that held pieces of me. I didn't write anything new. I just read. And when I closed it, I didn't feel small. I felt returned. I felt mine. Not anyone's mother, not anyone's property, not anyone's burden to manage or steal from or quiet, just Alara. That Sunday, Evelyn Reed published one last piece, a short one, titled "The Ones Who Fought Back." It wasn't just about me. She'd spoken with others, women mostly, all with stories, all with names that had been whispered too quietly for too long. I read it once, then again, and then I went outside and cut the last of the hydrangeas. The ones Arthur planted in '89, the ones I almost let die. They bloomed that year, brighter than I remembered, like they were waiting, like I had been. And if you've read this far, if you've ever felt erased, ignored, or made small by people who claim to love you, then let this be your reminder. You are not weak. You are not alone. And it is never too late to take yourself back. Share this. Save this. Let someone else remember who they are. Character count.